Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this episode of the IGI Cybersecurity Hot Seat. It is a pleasure to have a man who was my boss, mentor, and now proud to be able to call him a true friend, CEO of OrbitalFire, Reg Harnish. Reg, thank you so much. This is an honor to have you on. I think back to January 2016 and fast forward to now, I'm like, this is kind of bizarre. But it's always an honor to speak with you, and excited for our guests to learn from your expertise. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. Great, great. So for those of you that don't know Reg has a long history in our cybersecurity and risk and compliance space. Reg, I was hoping maybe you could just give a little bit of insight of how you kind of came into cybersecurity. You have a really cool backstory of how you landed here, but maybe just give the guests some information on how you started.
Sure. It was honestly somewhat accidental. I got into cybersecurity back in 2002, probably around 2002, but we didn't call it cybersecurity back then. And I was working for a company. I was one of the founders of and chief technology officer there, a company called Autotask, which is now Datto. And we had a very big potential customer who was interested in buying an enterprise version of our software, which basically meant they were going to deploy it on premises rather than using our cloud. That's funny to think that we were using the cloud in 2002, but so they had gone through like business viability, features, functionality, all that stuff. The last hurdle was getting through a cybersecurity assessment. And that was really my first introduction to the ISO 27001. So obviously back in 2002, I got my butt kicked, and I was responsible for getting us over this hurdle so that we could sell to a multi-billion-dollar technology distributor. And so we figured it out. And but the process was really interesting to me and very exciting, and I just fell in love with it, and it aligned with my personality. And I think in some ways I have an interesting instinct for assessing and managing risk, and I love being a contrarian, so I guess we'll leave that at that. And so fast forward 10 years, I was doing some consulting for New York State around the electric grid, cybersecurity for the electric grid, and I did a few other things. And then by 2009, 2010, had kind of gotten fed up that there were just very few providers out there doing the kind of things that I needed done. And so that was really how Greycastle was born, really out of need. And so, that story's kind of been told. 2011 started Greycastle, and then, have kind of just done nothing but cybersecurity since. OrbitalFire is now 2.5 years old. We're super excited. Growth has been amazing for the last, 2.5 years. And we're excited about our mission too, tackling a slightly different part of the problem, at the small business end, which is both rewarding and an unbelievable grind. But we love what we do, and we're happy we're here. So that's kind of the abbreviated story.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm glad you brought up Orbital and kind of where you're at right now, because that's a transition that you've made. You hear Autotask, you hear Datto, you hear New York State Grid, Greycastle. Yeah, we had our humble beginnings, but now pretty large organization. There had to be a paradigm shift into SMB, into micro-sized businesses, and not to diminish them whatsoever. This country, I think you actually put the stat out. I mean, what is it? 90% plus of our businesses stateside are small to medium-sized businesses, but it is a grind when it comes to cybersecurity. Was there an event, or was I'm interested into the path that you took to say, hey, this is definitely an underserviced community. I have the skills and talents that need to go into this to make it better. I'm interested in the journey, quick journey scope of how you got to this point.
Yeah, so that 99.7% is actually a federal census statistics, not mine. And when the idea sort of was born back in really now, early 2000, or sorry, early 2020, the numbers were there. Obviously, the addressable market, 32 million of them, then they represent, I think it's 65% of the country's GDP and 60% of the employees work for a small business. The numbers were overwhelming. And so that was exciting. I think what I probably overlooked to some degree is the the level of, what's the right word, disenchantment or just disillusionment that SMBs really had been feeling, and probably definitely still are feeling. And I think we discovered that there were a few challenges that we had to get over with SMBs before we could even start talking about what OrbitalFire could help them with. Most of them believe that they're either invulnerable or they're willing to roll the dice. But the rest of them have already been conditioned to believe that cybersecurity is just too expensive for them and too complicated. And you know what? They're right. And so as we were going through the analysis and looking at, what services could we put together at what budget, what price points, and how would we automate our business so that we could make some money too and survive? There were, some things I think we underestimated, but one thing was very clear is that really no one is operating at this end of the market. And I'm not going to mention any names, but if you look at all the popular tools, I mean, the thousands and thousands of tools that are out there, and the hundreds of providers out there, they're all targeting enterprise. Micro enterprise, maybe. Medium-sized business, maybe, but none of them have anything for small businesses. It's either too expensive, too complex, or just unnecessary, or the technology requires armies of people to maintain. There's just not a good fit. The problems are not as complex at the small end of the market. And so these massive platforms and enterprise providers, there's just no way for them to scale down. And so when we thought about doing this, and we agreed we're going to give this thing a go, it was really important to us to kind of think about cybersecurity in a different way and scaling it down, and not only finding a platform that we could scale down to be affordable enough, but also thinking about NIST 171 differently and every other framework and regulation. So how can we get our customers through this compliance journey in a way that's defensible, but doesn't take months of assessment and remediation and hundreds, I mean tens of, but certain, or maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there was a lot of work, probably 6 to 9 months that went into the engineering of OrbitalFire before we kind of launched. And then honestly, as you always do with a startup, you learn a lot of really hard lessons. And I really knew nothing about small businesses 3 years ago, and I probably still know nothing about small businesses. But what we're seeing is really rapidly accelerating interest and understanding and adoption of the kinds of things that we're doing, because it's really getting in the way of them doing business today.
Yeah, it's funny. This guy one time said, you talked about being overwhelmed by the tool set and by the frameworks. Like, do the minimum to get you defensible, And some guy said that. I don't know who that was, but whatever. But you're
Smart guy. Sounds like a
smart
smart
guy.
guy.
Yeah, smart guy. We'll get him on. We'll get him on the podcast one time. But I think you're right. It's the overwhelming piece of it, and if you think of yourself as a consumer, if you have to undertake a massive project that, could my family eat and live comfortably without taking on this massive project? Yes, but knowing that if that domino were to fall, the whole house of cards can come down with it. So how do you simplify that message? Because, this is more closer to the consumer purchase than it is to like an enterprise, massive purchase that you can make.
Interesting that you put it that way, but yeah, one of the advantages of working with small businesses is you're pretty much immediately working with the decision maker.
Mhm.
Yeah, the owner, whoever. It's not like enterprise where you got to go through stacks and hierarchies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But simplifying the message has been difficult for sure. I think because our prospects come in already conditioned to be fearful and maybe paralyzed,
Mm.
uh, uh, but also like I said, sort of disconnected and disenchanted by what's going on out there. I mean, when you see, you know, whether it's headlines or, you're Google searching for a tool that can help you, you don't, SMBs just don't show up
Mhm.
there. You never feel like you can connect with the problem and the solution because when someone's talking about cybersecurity, they're talking about Target, they're talking about Home Depot, they're talking about, you know, so it's real easy to say, hey, maybe this thing isn't for me. Maybe when they talk about securing your supply chain, they're not talking about me. I'm only a 25 person ball bearing manufacturer. Like,
Yeah.
I guess it's not for me. And it's hard. So messaging, because we refuse to be, um, we don't sell on fear. Like, we just principally against that.
Mhm.
But I think what we've done is we've tried to tune our messaging as tightly as possible and as direct and as relevant as possible. But a big part of it, maybe an even bigger part, was in our sales process. We're not in the business of changing minds. So if we talk to a small business and we say, hey, listen, if you're having problems with this or that, and these are things that we could probably help with at a rate that maybe you're going to be surprised by. And if they say, nah, my IT's got it, they got it covered, or nah, that's not for me. I'm not, I don't think I'm vulnerable. Why would they want me? We say, awesome. Yeah, great meeting you. If that ever changes, let us know. And here's why. When you think about the math of enterprise sales, like, there's only 500 Fortune 500 organizations.
Mhm.
So if you walk away from 50 of them, guess what? You just lost 10% of your addressable market. But if you walk away from 50 small businesses, guess what? You haven't even scratched the surface. So here's the thing. If we generally agree that, I don't know, let's call it 1% of all small businesses are meaningfully interested in pursuing cybersecurity in some way, that's 3.2 million.
Mm.
That's 3.2 million.
Mm.
And so our part of our challenge now is getting to know really quickly. So we're not wasting their time and we're not wasting our time, and we can go find that needle in a haystack, one of those, 1%ers who are looking for us and are ready to move. So our sales process is very, very focused on qualification. And, we go through the usual stuff, and it's probably no different than the things that you're using today. But the most important one is, are you ready to buy now? Meaning, if you find something that you believe in and you see value in that you can afford, are you going to move forward this month? And if not, they're out of our pipeline. So what's that? That's resulted in a close ratio north of 60% and some other things. But it takes a lot of work to find that 1%. The volume business kind of is a double-edged sword. There's lots of leads out there. You got to remember that 99% of them are just they don't meet your criteria right now because they're just not ready for whatever reason.
Mm. Yeah. So let's direct the last couple of questions that we have here towards SMB, and maybe give some masterclass advice to them. You know, this is all a financial exercise, in my opinion. With cybersecurity, it really goes down to risk and how much is an organization willing to spend to mitigate the risks. We don't want to put the $10 million fence around the $10 horse, or bog people down. Time is another currency that I think is overlooked in especially in SMB. If you're talking to the owner about cybersecurity of a bakery, like, he or she is just concerned about getting buns in the oven and icing them and selling them and getting out the door. The time that it takes to do this is important too, to understand. But really it comes down to financials. Financials is a big thing. So using your theory of basic controls, talk to the SMBs about, from a financial perspective, how it can help them to put in these basic controls to protect their interests and their assets.
Well, I think I agree with you. I believe that economics is one of, if not the primary driver for small businesses engaging, but I think it's on a different axis. So rather than thinking about risk and $10 horses, this is really about how do we translate that economic indicator into something that they really understand, because small businesses really don't understand risk. And there's no way to really, in a short amount of time, get them to the point where they can make an informed decision on risk. So what we instead have completely pivoted to is what are the 3 to 5 things that are headaches for them where we don't have to talk about cybersecurity. We can talk about other things. Great example. If you're a manufacturer making ball bearings and you're in the DoD supply chain, well, guess what? Forget about risk. You can't even bid on that next contract unless you can demonstrate some level of compliance with the mandates. And what we found is that that makes a lot more sense, because then they can put a dollar figure on it in their head. We don't have to do it for them. But not only that, it's something that they think about every day, because they're starting to feel the pressure, and it's happening other places. But enforcement at the SMB level is not the feds and regulatory authorities and the PCI Council and on and on. It's their supply chain, because they're at the bottom. And so what's happened is, and we've definitely seen this in the DoD space with DFARS and CMMC, is that the federal government, I think it was either an accident or they got really smart. They said, we're just going to hammer the primes and the subprimes. And part of the requirement for them is going to be, you need to figure out how to make this work in the supply chain. We're not doing it. We couldn't possibly afford enough auditors to make 32 million businesses compliant. But so we're going to put it out on you. But as it turns out, that's actually way more effective. And that's way more motivating for a small business, because they understand selling their stuff. They understand we make ball bearings, and if we don't sell ball bearings, we go out of business. They understand that. So that has really been a motivator for my customers. Another thing is insurance. They understand insurance. They may not understand actuarial science. They may not understand coverages and limits and retentions, but they understand not being able to get a policy at all. That feels very exposed and risky. Can't put a dollar figure on it, but they know that it feels bad. Questionnaires from their existing customers saying, listen, if we can't get satisfactory answers back here, we're going to have to discontinue our relationship. Like revenue, they understand revenue. These small businesses, everyone's connected to revenue, because there's only 50 people in the entire business. And so what's happened, I think, is that cybersecurity is manifested in a way where small businesses, it's become a barrier to them performing basic, well understood business functions. And that's created motivators. That's important to them.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, last question. This is ambiguous and kind of out there, and it's hard to boil down and distill. But you come across, because in my role, I've been working with a lot of small businesses, micro businesses, things like that, and they're just paralyzed. Use the word paralyzed of where to start. What do I do first? If it's not a regulatory compliance, or if it's just a business that is reading the FUD out there, or watching mainstream news and freaking out, and reading stats about small businesses, they're just like, I don't even know where to start. Do I plug in a firewall? Do I put this on an endpoint? I had one organization, it was a boat marina, and they experienced a ransomware attack. And the neighboring marina got in touch with one of my partners, and we talked. And she's like, "I can't have that happen." I'm like, "Well, yeah, tell me about your infrastructure." "Oh, we work out of a MacBook." I'm like, "Okay, you
Right.
gotta, But it was still that question. But I don't know where to start. I don't know where to go. So, for your clients and kind of your own philosophy, if someone were to come to you and say, "Hey, what's step one?" Where would you drive them to?
Yeah. That's a really hard question, but I think probably the most effective one for my customers is let's let's do one of two things. Either one, let's start anywhere where we can demonstrate progress and show some value.
Hmm.
I don't care where it is. Like if it's something you're familiar with, you've heard of, you're bored, asked a question about whatever. Let's just start somewhere, make progress, and show value. Because I think that starts to create momentum, but I also think it creates a sense of trust in the system and in cybersecurity in general. The second is, and in the spirit of helping my customers literally do the absolute minimum in cybersecurity that they absolutely need to, is we can start with an assessment. Now, the challenge with that, of course, is and the opportunity is your assessment can't last months. So, we get through assessments now in 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks at the outside, pretty much. So we can say, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, engage with OrbitalFire, and in 3 weeks, we can have an entire cybersecurity roadmap. We're not going to force you to do a single thing. We're going to help you make some informed decisions. And if there's something that you want to move forward with, we can probably help you get there because we're kind of an all-in-one. And for a small business, there's almost not the technology, but everything else. There's almost nothing that we can't do for them. So that kind of simplicity is super helpful, and it's immediate. So, they're not talking about protracted engagements for tens of thousands of dollars. It's like in 3 weeks and, for, whatever it is, we can give you an entire roadmap. You can see the entire thing. We're going to lay it out all in front of you, and then we'll pick something to do and make progress on and show value in. But it's really, I think beyond though too, it's very difficult to say other than what's your current headache? Is it insurance? Is it this? Is it that? Is your board screaming about, the incident you just had, whatever. Um, those two places work for us. I'm sure there are others.
That's great. That's great. That's good stuff. Reg, as always, it's just good to catch up with you. We definitely hit on a subject that doesn't get a lot of exposure these days, and it really does. Obviously, given the numbers of small to medium-sized businesses that are out there, micro businesses that are out there as well. And kudos to you and your team at OrbitalFire for taking this on and making our world a little bit safer from a cyber perspective. So thank you for joining us today, Reg, and greatly appreciate your insight.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time today, Paul. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, buddy. Take care.